Now, sticking with the theme of party agreement, I found myself this time last week at a dinner with some quite senior political figures in the room, and they weren't just from one party, there were several parties represented there. When the conversation came around to net zero, there was unanimity in the room that the UK was right to pursue its net zero policy. They all look forward to the Skidmore review, the Chris Skidmore review, which came out on the Friday of last week, and they all also believed that going for net zero would have huge benefits for our economy. Now, I've questioned both of those things many times over the years, but to see that level of agreement in politics was extraordinary. Now, to be fair, there is a small rump in the Conservative Party, one or two Labour as well, who question this, but this is the unanimous view of most of our media and indeed pretty much everybody in Westminster too. And it's a very timely debate because the WEF are about to kick off their annual jamboree at Davos, and they all agree too. But does it make sense? And what did Chris Skidmore actually have to say in that report on Friday? Well, joining me, Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute into Climate Change and the Environment. I mean, you know, you're in the climate change industry. Must be a very easy place to be because you really do have huge political support, don't you?
Well, I'm in the university and I deal in the evidence. And the thing about the Skidmore review, remember, was it was commissioned by Liz Truss in response to a small group of her own MPs who said that net zero is a problem for the economy. Now, net zero, remember, means stopping climate change. That's what it actually means.
Well, hang on a second.
Well, of course it does. It means net zero emissions. That's what you need to do in order to stop climate change.
Well, there's no guarantee that it would stop climate change, is there?
If the world gets to net zero emissions, then we will stop climate change. That's what the scientists say.
Yes, but the point about this is net zero for the United Kingdom. We'll come on to the global. We'll come on to the global stuff in a minute, and that, you know, and even if we did that, you know, we can't necessarily play God. This report came out on Friday, and basically it urged the government to go further and faster, and in particular, what I spotted was to get rid of gas boilers even earlier than previously forecast, to replace them with heat pumps. That is unaffordable, Bob, for average families.
Well, I think people think at the moment that it's unaffordable to have a gas boiler because the cost of gas is so high. We're about to go into a really bitterly cold period now. Some people are going to really suffer during this cold weather, and that's because of our dependence on natural gas, which is far too expensive. Now, if we had made investments earlier and in onshore wind, for instance, onshore wind,
but when the wind doesn't blow, it's useless.
Well, the wind's blowing at the moment. Yesterday, it supplied more than 50% of the electricity, right? And if you want to shut down onshore wind, then you'd have to then burn even more natural gas, and your bill would be even higher. That's
the more dependent we become on wind, also the more dependent we become on natural gas as a backup when the wind doesn't blow.
That can't possibly be true, Nigel.
It is.
If you have a system that depends entirely on natural gas and a system that has mostly wind and then a bit of gas as backup, being dependent fully on natural gas is far more expensive. That's far more dependent on gas.
If we don't have natural gas at the moment, we have a massive problem. I mean, look, this report, by the way, heat pumps, when it gets really cold, the one big study that was done in Glasgow, where they tried this on a block, when the temperature gets down to -4 or -5, heat pumps need vast amounts of electricity to keep going.
Heat pumps are far more efficient than gas boilers.
In the right conditions.
Lots of Scandinavian countries use heat pumps. It just means you have to insulate your house properly, which you should want to do.
In a modern build house, when it doesn't get too cold, it may work. This report calls for a revolution. That was the word that Skidmore used. A revolution in wind energy, with a particular focus on onshore wind and in solar as well. And here's the point. Now, if you say to people, we're going to cover up huge amounts of agricultural land with solar panels, or we're going to build a wind farm on every beauty spot, every upland beauty spot in the United Kingdom, there is huge public opposition aesthetically to us doing it.
Let's not exaggerate. At the moment, golf courses cover far more land in Britain than solar panels. This idea that somehow we're going to stop growing food and put solar panels on farmland is just simply
Well,
untrue.
he does call for a revolution.
It calls for a revolution
A
because
five-times
the
increase.
economics are very clear, Nigel. It will generate jobs and growth. It will lower our bills. Remember, the reason the economy is really struggling at the moment is because of the crippling cost of energy, which is all down to fossil fuels.
Which is all
it's
down.
our dependence on fossil fuels that is crippling our economy.
The reason we have energy 50% more expensive in many cases than France and Germany, electricity being an example, way more expensive for industries than America, is we've been on the net zero route for longer than anybody. We've subsidised to hell our renewable industries by putting up bills. And this is the point. Does green energy create jobs? Yes. Lots of jobs in China, manufacturing turbines, manufacturing solar panels.
They're fitted here, Nigel. You don't bring in people from China to set up, build wind turbines.
There are jobs in Grimsby and Hull and places like that.
We have a world-leading offshore wind industry, Nigel, that's putting to work people in Scotland and all across the northeast who would otherwise be building oil rigs.
Putting out of work people who work in smelting, people who work in refining, people who work in chemicals. Thus far, we've lost 3 to 4 jobs in traditional manufacturing industries to every one that Green's created.
Look, we've been down this route before. The reason we're losing manufacturing jobs is because labour is cheap in other countries. It's not down to energy.
It's a factor. It's a factor.
It's not a factor. People in China are being paid less to do the same job as here. Now, unless you want to reduce people's wages at a time of record inflation...
No, I don't.
...then you're not going to be able to compete with China.
I want to have the shale gas revolution that America had.
Well, that's easy for you to say, Nigel,
Yes.
because I bet your house is not in the Preston New Road in Blackpool, where there's a risk of damage to the houses.
Well,
the people who are most in favour of fracking are the ones who don't own houses near the fracking sites.
Now, let's think about the global dimension of this. Okay, let's see this quick clip of the great Greta Thunberg yesterday in northern Germany, and Greta was there because the Germans, being more pragmatic than us, are going back to mining coal. And she was there. A small hamlet's going to be demolished. The Germans are now burning huge amounts of coal. And by the way, lignite, which is I get it. Coal is ugly. But here's the point about Greta's protest, about the objections in this country to a new mine opening up in Cumbria. Do you know how much, maybe a tough question, but do you know how much coal is going to be burnt in the world in 2023?
It'll be far more than we need.
Okay.
The reason why, why they're burning more coal is because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
No, not
That's
true.
That's exactly true.
Not
of course
true
it's true. They have got less gas to burn.
They
are burning more coal than short.
I'll tell you why.
But they are going to invest in renewables.
The figure is 8 billion tonnes. Mankind will burn more coal in 2023 than ever before in the history of humanity. Why? Because of the rapid expansion in China. Why? Because other big countries like Indonesia, for example, has 243 coal-fired power stations. China rebuilding 80 new ones.
And we're burning less than ever before, Nigel. Remember, developed countries can move away. Developing countries find it more difficult.
Here is the point. Coal use is exploding. We produce less than 1% of global GDP. If the cost of these policies is disadvantaging us economically, it doesn't make any difference to the world, does it?
I don't see how moving to renewables and becoming less dependent on massively expensive fossil fuels, which are making all our bills, households and businesses more expensive, how that would disadvantage us. But the same token, electricity from renewables can only benefit
Well, so far it's been very expensive.
No.
Very
natural
expensive.
gas is far more expensive at the moment than offshore wind.
Well, and natural gas prices.
And onshore wind is even cheaper. If only you had campaigned for more onshore wind,
natural gas
we'd be
prices,
in a better position
natural
now,
gas
Nigel.
prices go down as well as up. But will you agree on one point with me? Whatever we do, we make no difference to the world in terms of net zero.
No, that's not true, because our leadership matters a lot. And when I talk to people in China, they want to learn from us. They want us to lead by example. What they won't do is listen to us try and bully them and say, we're going to drag our feet, we're going to spend even more on natural gas.
You may believe what the Chinese tell you. I'm more sceptical.